Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's good to be here with you today, and I'm glad to be in this gorgeous part of the country on such a pretty day. Let's see if we can get our technology working here. It's always a challenge, isn't it? Now, I was asked, let's talk about something that's going to enrich our lives as sisters. So I was thinking during the month of May, let's focus on Mary, and let's do something biblical. So we're going to do what I'm calling the art of the Annunciation. And here's what I propose that we do this morning. First of all, I'm going to make some introductory comments and then read the story of the Annunciation from Luke's Gospel. We all know it well, but so we have it sharply in our minds. And then we're going to take a look at the handout that's on your places, and then take a look at some pieces of art that illustrate and that interpret the story of the Annunciation, and then end with a prayer. So, with that in mind, let's begin with Luke's story of the Annunciation. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And coming to her, he said, "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at what was said, and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. Then the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give him the throne of David his father, and he will rule over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." But Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I have no relations with a man?" And the angel said to her in reply, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be called Holy, the Son of God. And behold, Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age. And this is the 6th month for her who was called barren, for nothing will be impossible for God." Mary said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. May it be done to me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. Now let's just take a minute and reflect on whatever words from that story are staying with you right now this morning. And for different ones of us, the words we're thinking of are probably different. And maybe they're your favorite word from the entire story. Or maybe whatever words are staying with you this morning are something special for today, either because of some news you've heard from one of your loved ones, or because of something in that story that has special meaning for you today, whatever it might be. But let's hold those thoughts and look some more at interpreting the Bible through art. Now, when we think about art, we might think back to the beautiful medieval cathedrals where all the windows and all the frescoes on the walls and all the sculptures illustrated biblical people and stories for the benefit of people who were not able to read. And so, at that time, people learned about our biblical tradition by looking at pictures. And some of the pictures we look at this morning come from that early period, 15th and 16th century, as more people were just beginning to learn to read. But as we know, even once people began to learn to read, they didn't have the kind of access to the printed word that we have today, do they? You know, when I entered the community, that was in 1960, and it had become the custom that all the sisters would have our own prayer book. But we were always reminded that when Elizabeth Seton founded the Sisters of Charity in 1809, there was one book, and the leader of the prayer would read from the one book. So our prayer consisted of quite a few litanies. And then the prayer leader could intone the first line of the litany, and we would all respond. And that was a very effective way to pray when people did not have access to the written word. And it always serves as a reminder to me that we in the 21st century take for granted access to the written word, don't we? In fact, we're so bombarded with written words we can't keep up with them all. But once upon a time, in the not too distant past, that was not the case, and people depended on reading, not through words, but through pictures. So, one of the ways we might get ourselves into the spirit of today is to think back about being in unison with all those people who counted on pictures to learn and to appreciate our tradition. But we do have access to words, and we are accustomed to using words. And so you have a whole page of words in front of you. Now I'm going to go through that for a while, and I'm wondering, would you prefer to have more lights turned on while we look at these pages, and then I'll turn them off again for when we look at the screen? What's your preference? Are we okay this way? Okay, that's good. And we'll just take a look at what's said. We're talking about the art of reading pictures. And the first thing we want to keep in mind, because we're going to be focusing on reading pictures about a biblical story, and we're going to be concentrating on the details of the story. A few minutes ago, every one of you was reflecting on what part of the story of the Annunciation calls to you this morning, focusing on some detail of that story. So we're going to begin looking at pictures by concentrating on details. So we're going to do this in 4 steps. As you can see, first of all, we're going to look at a picture. We're actually going to have 3, and we're going to look at them one at a time. And then what we're going to do, we're going to set aside for a minute the fact that we know the story of the picture. So we're going to set aside for the minute the fact that we're looking at pictures of the Annunciation, and we're going to reflect on details such as what media are used to create this image. Is it a photograph? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? And another kind of detail, what lines or shapes or patterns or textures do we see in the picture? Do we see movement, or do we see stillness? And what about space? Is the image completely filled with details, or is there some empty space? And what about the colors? Are there a whole variety of colors, or are they all different shades of the same color? And are the colors warm, or cool, or vibrant, or dull? And what about the total picture? Does it seem to be balanced or unbalanced? So the first thing we're going to do then is look at all those details, just concentrating on the piece of art. Then we'll go into a little bit more detail, and we'll notice What do we see here? Do we see things, concepts, people? Do we see symbols, or do we see objects? And how are they used? And what's the overall impression that we have? Do we have a certain feeling or a certain mood? And if so, how does the artist create that? And then, what particular elements in the work contribute to that particular mood? Is there some particular figure or object or area that seems to be very prominent? Or is there something that seems to be de-emphasized? And when we look at what seems to be prominent, what does that tell us about what the artist wants us to see as important? Then we ask ourselves, what is this image about? And then we begin to come back to the biblical story. What's the image about, and what suggests that? And how do the components of the image relate to the title of the piece? Then after we've looked at all those details, then we come back in our mind's eye to the biblical story. And we remind ourselves that paintings are not meant to be an illustration. They're not meant to be an exact replica of the story. In fact, they can't be a direct replica of the story because a painting captures only one moment, doesn't it? And the only way that a painting can tell a whole story is if it has several different parts to it. So we're going to notice that each one of these paintings is about one moment in the story of the Annunciation. And we'll be able to pick out which moment in the different paintings. So then the idea is not to say, well, they got it wrong or they got it right. That's not the idea. The idea is, how does this painting interpret the biblical story? So we'll ask ourselves such questions as, does the image relate explicitly or implicitly to the biblical passage? How does the image read the text? Does it change or alter the text? Does it highlight a particular aspect of the text? And what does the image not say? And we'll notice that in this story, there's a lot that it does not say because it captures only one moment. So what does it not say, or whose views are not represented here? And what are the limitations of the image? And one of the big limitations is it can only describe one moment in the story. So lots of other moments don't get to be included. Then, do you think the image offers a fair or a responsible representation? Why or why not? These three paintings are somewhat different from one another, and you're probably going to find that you have a favorite one among the three. You might even find that you don't like one or the other of them, and that's fine because the whole idea is this is the painter describing something about the story that appeals to that painter and that will appeal to different people at different times. So we might ask, do you think the image offers a fair or responsible representation? And why or why not? And then finally, what questions or observations does the image raise? By the time we get to the end, we might recall whatever that particular word or phrase was that was calling to us when we heard the words. And maybe there's going to be something in one of these three pictures that connects with whatever that was. Maybe it will take you more deeply into the story. Maybe it will cause for you to puzzle over certain aspects of that story, because there's a lot to puzzle over in that story, isn't there? So we'll see what questions, what observations come forth. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at each one of these in some detail, one at a time. We're going to be quiet with it for a while, and I'm going to have you talk with the people who are next to you for a while, and we'll also talk about what everybody sees or what everybody wants to make a comment about. But let's go to the first one. Now, I think we're going to do better without that bright light. Let's see.
Middle.
That's not the one that,
Middle.
there, it makes the picture more sharp, doesn't it? If you can't see, you might want to move to a different chair. This painting was done in the 15th century by Fra Angelico. It's actually a fresco. It was painted on a plaster wall in a monastery in Florence, Italy. The monastery is called San Marco, and in every one of the little cells, the little bedrooms, and in many of the community spaces, there is some beautiful fresco that calls forward aspects of the biblical story, the life of Saint Dominic, important other Dominican saints, and other beliefs in our religion. And as we can see here, this is a painting of the Annunciation. Now let's read. Okay, first of all, we notice details. We ask what media are used, and we already know because I told you this is paint on plaster, which we call a fresco. Now we want to see something about lines, shapes, patterns, and textures. So we notice the lines correspond to Romanesque art, and that's actually painted into the painting. That's not actually part of the architecture of the building, so that it's painted so that this scene looks like it's taking place in a Romanesque building. We notice there's a simplicity about this drawing. We notice simple lines, but we also notice graceful lines. So for instance, if we look at this, we see that there are vertical lines that suggest gracefulness. And we see the same is true over here. And the fact that there are circular lines makes it softer than if all the lines were straight up and down. In addition to that, when we think about movement and stillness, you notice this is a very still painting, isn't it? When we look at it, there's a quietness about it. Everybody has a pose that suggests that they're remaining still. So we have on the far right, we have a woman with her hands like this. She's not, and when you look at these lines, they're very still. We don't get any impression that there's a wind blowing or that somebody's rushing off somewhere. Everything is very still. And then in addition to that, we ask about the space. Is it completely filled, or is there empty space? And what about that empty space? There's a calmness about it, isn't there? We don't get a sense that there's a whole lot of busyness going on. There's a quietness that comes from that empty space. What about colors?
Subdued.
They are subdued, aren't they? Which is the color that stands out the most? This, isn't it? Yeah. So does that mean that the painter wants to suggest that this is the most important part of the painting? Well, maybe so. Maybe so. It might not be the part that we would think should be the most important when we think about the story, but that seems to be what the painter wants to emphasize. look at these colors. Now would be St. Dominic here, because this is in a Dominican monastery. Look at the difference between this and this. What can we say about them? One's brighter than the other, isn't it? Yeah. So we might ask, well, what difference does it make that one is brighter than the other? Let's just hold that thought. Okay, would we say that this picture is balanced or unbalanced? More on this side, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We have two people here and one person there. This person seems to be the largest of the three, and this one seems to be up higher. So that's the way it is. Now then we could ask ourselves though, would we want it to be perfectly balanced? You know, they always say in art, it's a lot more attractive to have an uneven number, don't they? You know, they say when we arrange flowers, don't have exactly an even number because it's not as attractive. And this is a beautiful arrangement. I haven't counted the flowers, but it's a beautiful arrangement, isn't it? So when we say that when we talk about balance and unbalance, we're not evaluating it, we're simply observing it. Okay, then let's observe a little bit more. Here, do we see things or concepts or people? We clearly see people, don't we? Now, because we already know what the story is, we also see a concept, don't we? In the sense that we know the message that's being delivered. But we can't tell just by looking at the picture, we can't tell about that, except, can we tell who's the person delivering the message?
Yes.
The tall one, right, yeah. And the position of the hands suggests that this one is receiving something, and this one is pointing up, that we might make something of that, or we might not make something of that, but we'll notice it. What is the overall feeling or mood of this image?
Wise.
It's solemn, isn't it? What makes it solemn?
Submission.
There's something about submission, the stillness, and there may be something about the formality. Maybe that adds to the solemnness of it, because clearly both of these figures are in a respectful position, aren't they? And maybe that helps to make it solemn. And this observer is also in a solemn position, isn't he? Paying attention reverently and quietly to whatever is taking place. Okay, and we talked about the fact that this appears to be the largest person, so we might ask, well then, what is it in this painting that makes that the most important person? And I wonder, is it the person who's the most important? Or since we already know the story, we might say, no, it's the message. The message is really more important than the messenger. Okay, and then we ask, what is the image about? And here's where we're going to go to the third part of that we have listed as number 4. And we remember we already know the story. And so we can ask ourselves, when we look at this image, does it relate explicitly or implicitly to the biblical passage? Well, one way of looking at that, if I hadn't told you ahead of time that this painting was about the Annunciation, we'd know it anyway, wouldn't we? Because we know the story very well, and because this painting illustrates that story in a way that it's very clear to us that that's what it's about. We can see because of the halos that these are holy people. We can see because of the wings that this is an angel, a messenger from heaven. And so we know that somehow in this painting, there's some message coming from God. And we can see from the receiver of the message, some people think it looks like she's kneeling, and some people think it looks like she's standing.
She's standing.
It's a little hard to tell, isn't it? But what we can tell is that she's in a position of reverently receiving the message. That we can tell, can't we?
Is that a book she's holding?
I think she is holding a book. I think she's reading her Bible. Yeah, I think that is meant to be a book. And that's not the kind of book Mary would have been holding, because books weren't made like this in Mary's day. They were more likely to have scrolls all rolled up than they were to have books with pages. But this comes from the 15th century, when they did have books that looked like that. If somebody was going to do a painting in the 21st century to illustrate the Annunciation, maybe they'd have an electronic device instead of a book. And that way that would appeal to a 21st century reader, wouldn't it? Okay, now when we look at this, we can ask, does this highlight a particular aspect of the text? So when we think back about the biblical story, in your mind's eye, is there a particular moment in the story that this suggests to you? And it might be different for different ones of you.
The fact that she has her head bowed a little bit makes me think perhaps this is when she was saying yes.
Okay, okay. In fact, what other details in that painting might suggest that this is the moment when she's saying yes?
Her head bent.
Her head is bent. Maybe something about the calmness and the quietness of the painting. She's not being depicted as bothered or agitated. She's calm, isn't she?
Almost like she's pondering what she just heard.
Right, right.
Another thing is the angel. You know, if it seems that, of course, you know, I'm not trying to jelly roll, but
None of us are.
but if he were delivering the message, it seems that he would be moving out toward her more. It's almost that he is in, or the angel, he or she, is in a pose of receiving also.
What do you make of that? That's a very insightful observation.
I didn't hear what you said.
She said it looks like this person is also receiving the message.
Receiving her.
Or receiving her response. Receiving her response. When you first said that, I thought, yeah, he received the message from God to go deliver the message, didn't he? And I thought,
Isn't Mary up?
So-
Mary okay, short, and she's standing on the bed.
it's hard to tell because of the way this fabric is draped. I don't know if she's, I don't think she's standing on it. She might be kneeling. She's probably shorter than he is anyway. But whatever it is, the fact that she is lower, whatever this position is, suggests that the dominant figure is the one delivering the message, isn't it? Yeah.
I had the idea that it seems that both are receiving, and the arches emphasize that. The message is going and the message is returning. It seems like, even though it's created arches, and that they're created for a purpose, kind of encompassing.
Exactly, exactly. And so they both become part of that circle. In fact, this one is a little bit outside that inner circle, isn't it? Which emphasizes this is the observer here. Yeah. You know, if this were being painted right here at Mount St. Joseph, maybe there'd be an Ursuline saint observing. Maybe that's how it would be painted. Yeah.
Is that angel, she looks like, I mean, he looks like a lady because her hair is thin, plaited or something sticking out.
Or curled, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly. They look, from up here, they look like curls. But it looks like we're not meant to be able to tell the gender of the angel. So clearly, that's not something that the painter wanted to be sure we understood, is whether it's a male or a female.
I would think the angel would definitely want mysteries to be a part of the picture.
Definitely. And how does this convey mystery?
This still
It's just silent, then the same things when you have worked it out yourself, but the mysteries is a mystery, even when you bring the rosary out, read these things, still not all clear.
To me, there's something about the stillness that helps convey the mystery. There's a contemplative atmosphere in this, isn't it? Yeah.
And the long lines. This is a painter who has the long hands and the long lines, you know, to portray holiness.
Mm-hmm. What other observations do you have?
I can't figure out what that is between the two part of that picture.
These are the wings. The wings have tails that come down. Yeah.
When you look at the top of the wing, it looks like a row of nuns from here.
That's what
It does.
Yeah, those are part of the wings.
I thought it was choirs of angels, maybe.
There probably is a whole choir in heaven. Somebody was wondering if this is a beard. This is actually a shadow here.
No, the man over there.
This man over here, yeah, that man has a beard for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Okay, look at the next question. It says, what are the limitations? Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to ask if Fra Angelico painted himself into the fresco.
He was actually a Franciscan.
Well, there's a face kind of in the middle between the angel and Mary.
You know, is this what you see?
Yes.
It's actually cracks in the painting.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
It looks like a face from
That's what I was hoping.
That would be fun if he put his own
What's
autograph.
that object behind the angel on the floor?
Object, there's a pillar here, and there's a pillar here. This is something here, I think this is just the floor. But if we remember that these paintings were painted on a plaster wall, and you know, the way that frescoes were done, plaster is wet, and then the paint goes on, so as the plaster dries, then it becomes permanent. But now figuring that this goes back to the 15th century, so it's several hundred years old by now. And then as the building settles, sometimes cracks develop. So that's what we see here. It's at the end here as well. Okay, then the next question asks us, what are the limitations of the image? What are the ways in which this is limited?
It doesn't reach out and engage. You have to enter the picture.
Okay, okay. Then another way that it's limited, remember, it can capture only one moment of the story. So the only moment we have here is what looks to us like Mary saying yes. So if we didn't know the story, we wouldn't have a clue what she's saying yes to. We know because we know the story. We also don't have any sense in here about what's going to happen next. We remember when we read the story, once Mary says yes, then the angel explains to her your cousin Elizabeth, who really we would have thought is too old to have children, she's already 6 months pregnant, and Mary, you get the sense from the story that Mary immediately decides she's gonna go and be of support to her cousin. But we don't get any clue of that here, do we? This is still stillness, okay? Now, when we ask then, what are the limitations of the image, the question is not what's wrong with it. The question is more helping us to focus on being present to this precise moment. And we know how often we try in our lives to be present to one precise moment, and we know how hard it is because our lives are so full of so many things. So, by looking at this painting that represents only that one moment, it can help each one of us to get quietly into that one moment.
So it takes you into contemplative prayer.
It does, doesn't it? Very contemplative prayer. And then if we remind ourselves that this was painted on the wall of somebody's little bedroom, it would be a reminder to enter into the contemplative lifestyle that goes with the monastery. Now the next question, we might have different opinions about this one. It says, do you think the image offers a fair or responsible representation, and why or why not? How many say yes? Anybody want to say no?
Well, you can't tell where she's kneeling or standing.
That's right, we can't tell whether she's kneeling or standing. Now, it might seem like we're belaboring the obvious with this question, but I want us to enter into it because when we see the next couple of pictures, it's a different atmosphere. So it's helpful for us to think about a fair or responsible representation. Many of you said yes. Why do you say yes, somebody?
I'm saying no.
You're gonna say no? Okay, we'll do you next. What is it about this painting that makes you call it fair or responsible? All the sudden, all the
It
yeses.
seems to include all the main elements of the event.
Okay, okay, and why do you say no?
Because she would be either standing there, kneeling there, she'd be peeling potatoes or working in the yard or something, the angel would appear to her.
Okay, okay, I think you're gonna like especially one of the next paintings, I think you're gonna like it.
She did,
What are those columns? Those columns, I don't see how that artist could put those in there because they don't fit into the upper part of the picture. Those columns.
You know, I
Top
think,
of the
I
column.
think they're actually meant to fit. I think these arches are the extension of the columns coming up. Yeah,
I said,
yeah. Uh-huh. So they're not part of the architecture of the building, they're part of the painting, yeah.
You can tell, from the dimness of Mary there, what her reaction is. I mean, she's bowed down and accepting, but there are no way to feature what she's thinking with the expression on her face. And surely she's questioning, well, she did question it, and you can't tell because she's dimmer, you know, than the angel there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and her face is very, what shall we call it? Well, it doesn't give anything away about what's in Mary's heart, does it?
No.
Neutral, thank you, yes. Okay, what other comments do we want to make about this painting?
Well, I like her response because the story says she pondered on these things, so she's not making a quick judgment here and saying yes to me. She's pondering what she's been asked to do. And so it's very quiet. I mean, it's like, well, yes or no,
And I'm kind of glad she took it seriously.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
kind of
good.
glad she
She
didn't
was
just
like-
rush
she
in and say,
didn't-
sure, I'll do that. 'Cause that was a pretty amazing thing she was being asked to do.
I think it's neat the way that her picture has more light around her head throughout her face, meaning that the light of God is at work here.
And for me, the fact that this halo is brighter conveys that. I don't know if it conveys that to you, but for me it does. Yeah. Okay, then the very last question asks us, what questions or observations does the image raise? What comments about that?
Well, since we hadn't been, we know, but in this picture we don't know, what does she say?
Yeah, exactly. Let's move to another painting. This painting was done about 100 years later by a man whose name was Lorenzo Lotto. This has a completely different atmosphere, doesn't it? Completely different. Look at all the details.
These are cats running too.
That's my favorite part of the picture. Whole different page.
This one's
Okay, let's look at some of the details. If we go back to our page, at the very top, you remember it invites us to look at the details before we think about the story. So we look at what media. Well, this is an oil painting. And when we ask about lines and shapes and patterns and textures, there are a zillion of them, aren't there? Lines going in every possible direction, a whole variety of shapes, a whole variety of textures. What about movement or stillness? Definitely movement, isn't there? Definitely.
Is it a mouse? I mean, a rat?
This is a cat. That's a cat. It's my favorite part of the painting. Because he's clearly scared to death. And to me, there's an element of the Annunciation that is terribly frightening. I mean, here's this woman going about her everyday life, and all of a sudden something just gets completely turned upside down for her. And so I think that surprise and that confusion is an important part of the story. Maybe she turned around when she saw him coming. Yeah. Okay, then the next question asks us, is the image completely filled or is there empty space? It's completely filled, isn't it? And notice how different that is from the one we looked at a minute ago, and how different the atmosphere that's created, because we go from a quiet, still painting to one that's very busy with lots of movement. Okay? And what about colors? Lots of bright, yes.
Like red, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And would we say the colors are warm, cool, vibrant, or dull? Definitely, definitely.
What is that
What about
red?
this question? Sorry.
What is that red at the top of the, near the top of the arch?
This.
What is that?
Who do you think that might be? God the Father, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What are those things?
These?
Yeah, what is
Well, I think there are hooks here. So maybe it's her shawl that she puts on when she goes outside, or maybe this is some kind of a hat that has the strings to tie it on. I think that's what those are. It's hard to see exactly. Now, would you say this is balanced or unbalanced?
That's like a
What makes it unbalanced?
The angel should be in front of her, not be way behind her. Who is she looking at?
She looks like she's looking at us, doesn't she?
Yeah, and you can tell that if that's an angel, he's a man. You can see by the,
She is so large that it almost balances the picture, because the other one was smaller.
And the fact that she's in the very front is significant too. She's the one closest to us, isn't she? Yeah. Okay, there's something else in this picture, and that is these lilies. What does that represent? Okay. And that begins to move us down to number 3 as we read the painting. Are we looking at things or concepts or people? All of it. Lots of people, things, concepts, a symbol.
Is that a tree up there or a much big
That's an umbrella.
That's an umbrella pine. This looks like a Roman villa is what it looks like to me. And this would be something, maybe it's a grapevine up there, or maybe it's ivy leaves that create a place of shade. If we think of this creating some kind of a roof so that there would be shade for the people underneath. This is an Italian painter, yes, Lorenzo Lago.
It looked like the ancient massive made an announcement yet.
Whatever the angel has or has not yet said, he's got Mary wanting to run away from him for sure. Okay, what about the question, what is the overall feeling or mood in this painting? Fear. Unrest, confusion. And how does the painter get that mood across to us? Her hands. There's something about her face. The cat's running away. Actually,
It's really ancient theology.
Does the angel have wings? Is that black?
Not exactly. Yes, these are the wings. This dark one here and here. Those are the wings. They're black because that's the way the painter made them. And since none of us really knows for sure what angel wings look like, maybe that's how they look and maybe they don't. That's how the artist did it. Now, which figure in this painting do you think is highlighted the most? Okay, and what is it about the way the painting is that makes her the most important? She's in the front. And I think the color, that red always calls attention to itself. Yeah. Again, say something, yes. If we contrast Mary's hands in these 2 paintings that we've looked at so far, look at Mary's hands there, and look at Mary's hands there. They create a whole different impression, don't they? Yes. Then let's move to the last part. Does the image relate explicitly or implicitly to the biblical passage? Okay, it's a different moment, isn't it, from the moment before? Both of them explicitly relate to the passage, but here we have the impression that Mary has said yes. Here, maybe the message hasn't been delivered yet. It sort of looks that way. And all of a sudden, whatever that book is that Mary's been reading behind her, all of a sudden, there's been some dramatic interruption that seems to have terrified her. So it's certainly a different moment.
Mary looks so old.
So what does this image not say?
It doesn't say what Mary's thinking, I wonder what's on the side of that.
That's right. We know she's looking out, we know she's looking away from the angel. Beyond that, we don't know what she's looking at. We can say she's looking at us, but she didn't know us at the time that was
We
happening.
can definitely see that she's kneeling because she had a foot on the foot. She's kneeling.
Because that's a prelude.
Yeah, this is probably a prayer book because it looks like it has ribbons to mark the place. How can this be for sure? For sure.
I know another thing is that the first painting was very carefully taken. And this were a photograph on the set, they cropped it too close to the people. There's no space, everything is facing toward the middle, and there's no space beyond.
Right. There's this space that God and the angel seem to be in. There's something here, some kind of a doorway or something. So in one sense, it's divided into three spaces, but it doesn't look like they're all comfortably in the same space, does it? In fact, if anything, you don't have this sense of a unity among them all. But then that leads us to the next question. If we say they're not all inhabiting the same space, well then let's look at the next question. Is this a fair or responsible representation? How many say yes? Who knows? Who knows? What are you saying? Yeah. I think it's very fair. I think it's a wonderful representation of that moment of unexpectedness, confusion, disruption, uncertainty. Now, it's not the only moment in the story. As we know, the story moves to the moment that's illustrated in the first painting we looked at. But this certainly does depict a moment in the story, doesn't it? Shall we look at the third one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Another very different painting. This was painted by an American whose name is Tanner. It was painted in 1898, so practically the beginning of the 20th century. This painting actually hangs in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Whole different sense of the Annunciation, isn't it?
No halos.
Okay, let's go back to the first set of questions. Number 2. What media? This is actually an oil painting. When we think about lines, shapes, patterns, and textures, what part of the painting has the most elaborate lines? Yeah, look at all of the details of the folds of that dress that kind of blend in with that afghan that's thrown. The black looks to me like an afghan thrown over a chair, and the rug kind of has a wrinkle in it. Other than that, we have the simple lines of the building itself. We have the simple lines of this wall hanging. We have a relatively simple pattern in the rug, and the bricks on the floor are a relatively simple pattern. This column of light is relatively simple. So the elaborate design focuses our attention on that girl, doesn't it?
Yes.
Very effectively so. Okay, thinking about colors, would you say they are warm, cool, vibrant, or dull?
Warm.
Very warm, aren't they? Yeah. What about the question of whether it's balanced or unbalanced? How many say it's balanced?
Not us.
And how many say it's unbalanced? Okay, those of you who see that it's balanced, what's balanced about it?
The column of lights, it has such intensity, it balances what's on the other side.
Okay, okay, and the contrast between these darker colors and the light, especially this one, helps create that balance, doesn't it? Somebody who thinks it's unbalanced, what is unbalanced here?
So much on the right compared to what's on the left.
Okay, okay. Okay, let's move down to the second set. Do we see things, concepts, or people? We see one person, don't we?
But you see things or?
Things, we see the bed, we see the rug, we see the wall, we see this column of light. No, we see there's a jug over here.
Oh, see that? Oh, yeah.
So we have some things. She's in awe of something. Now, there's a concept here. What's the concept here?
What that white light is.
The white light. Okay, now because we know the story, what do we know about that white light? That somehow it's the presence of God in this event. You know, and it's not painted to look exactly like an angel, is it? But the angels are God's representatives, and so this column of light certainly speaks to the presence of God and the presence of something that is very clearly capturing the girl's attention. Let's see, what else shall we say? What overall feeling or mood do we have?
Contemplation.
What do you think?
They should be in bed. That whole bed scene distracts me from the real message that's supposed to be coming across. And you're thinking of the century that it's in. That's out of place.
Okay, but you know what it says to me? Children are often conceived in bed, aren't they? And this message that is about to be delivered is that this child who is going to be born is going to be conceived in some way that we cannot comprehend. But to me, the fact that there's a bed in that picture and that she's sitting there calls to mind something about the huge mystery that's being described here in this painting. That's what it says to me. I find it kind of fascinating to illustrate the Annunciation in this way. You might not agree, that's my opinion.
It looks like she's wondering what this is all about.
Exactly, exactly. And wouldn't we expect that she would be wondering what it's all about? Let's see, if we move down to the last set of questions, does this relate explicitly or implicitly to the biblical passage? Yeah. Of the three that we've looked at, this is the one that is the least explicit about the actual biblical passage. Indeed. Okay, what does the image not say? Doesn't say whether she said yes or no, that's for sure.
Doesn't tell you the angels could be anything.
Right,
She's looking at the scene.
right,
But we don't know for sure what she is seeing.
right,
She may be seeing more than we do.
maybe. So there's a lot that this painting does not say, isn't there?
Mhm.
And if we didn't know the story of the Annunciation, we would not find the same meaning in this painting that we do find because we know that story. Going back to the fact that we said this is a more implicit representation.
Did you tell us when this was painted?
1898, yeah.
That wrinkle in the rug is a interesting detail, a wrinkle.
What does it say to you?
It's usually a hump to get over or an obstacle.
She didn't straighten her.
Could be.
She needs to get it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, looks a lot like my room for sure.
What is it, white float box there?
The white box,
Over on the right.
white box on a this.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if that's part of the architecture or if it's some kind of a closet or something.
Base
got a
is on
base
top
on
of
it.
it.
Yeah, it must be, oh, sure enough. Here's a- Yeah, and there's some kind of a little dish or something
Yes.
here. So it must be, at least we know it's something where you can put things.
It's a cabinet.
Yeah, yeah. What are the limitations of this image?
Gabriel's missing.
Invisible.
This one.
Visibly. You know, we could ask ourselves, couldn't we? Is the fact that God's presence is depicted only in this shaft of light, is that a limitation or is it an advantage? It adds to the mystery, doesn't it?
We sure don't know what angels look like, even though we've made them forever. We don't know
We don't
or
have
what God looks like.
Precisely, yes.
Somewhere I heard that the angel, when they said the angel of the Lord appeared, it's really the Lord appeared, but they did not say his name. And when you say an angel of the Lord appeared, what it really means is the Lord, God himself, but they didn't go that far because of their reverence for the name of God and the presence of God.
Right. And that's one of the things that I love about this shaft of light. Yeah. Okay, what about getting down to the bottom? Do you think the image offers a fair or responsible representation? Why or why not? How many say yes, you think it's fair and responsible? How many say not? Okay, difference of opinion. Those of you who think it's fair or responsible, why?
It's about her.
Well, I think just the presence of God and the message, even to us, it is not necessarily visible of something, but you can feel it in your spirit. And God is spirit, so the Spirit of God, or God himself, is there. It doesn't have to be something visible as we think of it.
Right, right, right.
And I think he's being honest, we don't really know what an angel looks like, we don't know what God looks like. So it's leaving the ambiguity there for you to use as you experience the light of God.
Right, right.
I see her questioning. That's what the story is. I mean, that is in the story that she questioned.
Yeah, yeah.
Is the title for a picture of the Annunciation?
It's called The Annunciation, that's the title.
What do you think that people would think it is, if they couldn't see a title?
The first time I saw it, I was really fascinated, and then all of a sudden I thought, you know, this is an Annunciation. And then I remember, I wonder if that's really what the painter had in mind, and then I saw the title. But again, if we didn't know the story,
Could be
if we didn't know the story, we might not know that it has something to do with God. We might know that it's something about something that's potentially a life-changing moment, but we might not be able to identify more than that.
She may be just waking up from a dream.
She might be. She might very well be. In fact, she might be waking up from a dream after a restless night when you look at the amount of disruption.
But when we think about the stylized kind of Annunciation that we're used to in just, store-bought art, you know, the statues that we put up and stuff, this really stretches your vision and makes you, think about it in a different way.
That's a good way to put it, stretches our vision, stretches us to think about the story in a different way, think about the realities of life in a different way, think about it in a deeper, broader way.
Hail's Mary is very human.
Sure does, sure does.
She doesn't look very excited.
She's not a one on the Enneagram.
Okay, let's just take a look at all three of them again, very briefly. And notice how differently the same incident is depicted. And since we do know the words that the angel said to Mary, and since we're accustomed to praying them, let's end by saying the Hail Mary together. Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy